Is the Transfiguration a metamorphosis? The answer to that question isn't really up for debate. The Greek word used for transfiguration is in fact the same root word for metamorphosis used by Ovid, but that raises even more questions. This is not a religious channel, but it's not a religious channel. All the synoptic gospels include an account of a transfiguration, whereas strangely, they don't all include an ascension. In every case, this narrative's placement is immediately following Jesus' prediction that some who are standing there will not taste of death before they see God's kingdom. What is the Transfiguration? In every account, Jesus takes his three closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, to an unidentified mountain to pray. There, his clothes and appearance are changed, and he is joined by Moses and Elijah. Peter suggests they set up three tents for them, but a heavenly voice from a cloud tells them to listen to Jesus. The disciples suddenly find themselves alone with Jesus, who orders them not to tell anyone about this incident until after he has risen from the dead. The word choice for the term transfiguration comes to us from the Latin, but avoiding the word metamorphosis seems suspiciously like an attempt to distance Christianity from a possible Hellenic similarity. Ovid Metamorphoses, or Book of Changes, is a thematic anthology of Greco-Roman mythology linking each narrative with a transformation at the conclusion. Each story is a predictable formula, like the ironic twist of fate in a Tales from the Crypt comic book. But they're not all the same genre. One such narrative type, as exhibited in the story of Baucis and Philemon, which I covered in another video, is theoxany. In a theoxany, virtuous humans extend hospitality to a humble stranger who is then revealed to be a god in disguise. One reason why readers may not see similarities between the Gospels and Ovid is because the placement of the Transfiguration occurs in the middle of the story, not at the conclusion. But scholars have started to question if that was always the case. If we place the Transfiguration at the end of the story, then it reads like a true theoxany. One reason why its placement seems odd is because Matthew and Mark start this story 6 days later, but there's not really a major life event for this to follow, and there isn't any date fixation in the preceding narrative. Typically, this kind of day counting would be used to identify a Sabbath. If the Transfiguration was originally a pre-ascension conclusion, then this would place it on the Sabbath following the resurrection. It's also notable that, unlike the others, Luke concludes with the ascension, but also changes the setting of the Transfiguration to about 8 days after. Matthew even concludes with Jesus meeting his disciples on a prearranged mountain, but there's no prior mention of that in the text. Regardless of its placement in the narrative, there's still a question about what this metamorphosis is supposed to be. It tells us the appearance of his face changed, yet it never gives us a description of his appearance either before or after this change. Only Peter, James, and John are witness to the Transfiguration, yet nobody seems to have a problem identifying Jesus until after his resurrection. We take this for granted today, but recognition and identification were more difficult to establish in the ancient world before photography. It's lost on us that the authorities needed Judas to identify Jesus for them because people outside of his circle wouldn't have had any way of knowing what he looked like. Today, we have a conceptualization of Jesus' appearance accumulated through centuries of tradition, but that iconography didn't exist at the time. The text almost seems to be trying to gloss over this, however, in the way the disciples appear to recognize Moses and Elijah without any introduction. The absence of a description of Jesus' appearance is glaring, considering it's a plot device of the post-resurrection appearances. Particularly in Luke and John, his disciples repeatedly don't recognize the risen Jesus at the tomb, and then later on the road to Emmaus. Secret identities were a recurring feature in Greek mythology, and like Odysseus, the identity of Jesus is revealed to Thomas by his scars. In a recent debate with Catholic apologist Trent Horn on the question, "Did Jesus rise from the dead?" skeptic Alex O'Connor brings up the hypothesis of the Transfiguration belonging at the end of the story, but I didn't think he brought it to its logical conclusion. Having somebody miraculously change their appearance is a brilliant way to make it seem as if they're still alive after a public death. Scars can be replicated more easily than a person's face. Like I've said about other miracles, this has the signs of being a magic trick. And then this sleight of hand can get easily forgotten if the stories get shuffled out of order. Believers can have a knee-jerk reaction when I say this, but it's not necessarily an accusation of fraud or malice. Asserting that the only motivation for this would have been deception is a false dilemma. Examples of theoxany taking form in ritual include Jews setting an empty seat for Elijah or children leaving milk and cookies for Santa. We generally don't see these as deceitful. The issue of Jesus' appearance raises questions in other parts of the New Testament. There are several problems with Paul's claim that the risen Christ was seen by over 500 people at one time, most of whom it claims were still living. First, of course, that this claim without any named witnesses is effectively unfalsifiable. It seems to serve as a bookended complement to Jesus' prophecy about some standing there being alive for its fulfillment. There was no way even at the time to confirm any of their testimonies. None of the people mentioned in Paul's letters are ever identified as one of these witnesses. We have no way of knowing if any of these supposed witnesses had seen what Jesus looked like before his death, although that seemed to be a problem even for those who knew him. I would argue these problems arise specifically because we don't see the text through the lens of Greek myth. In the Greek counterpart, the literal interpretation of the narrative doesn't matter as much as the moral lesson. However, Christianity appropriated the plots of mythology while prioritizing their literal interpretation over their moral application. The genre of theophany instructed people to be kind to strangers because they could be gods in disguise, but that gets lost when this becomes the Christian doctrine of incarnation. In the same way, Greek myths indicate to be kind to unwed mothers because their children could be the offspring of the gods, yet Christians will assert the virgin birth of Mary while being hostile to single mothers. The Christian emphasis on belief in story over message ultimately loses the plot.